ladies and gentlemen, citizens of planet Earth, to the debut episode of the anonymous headquarters podcast, The Anoncast. My name's Alec Heidel. I'm an author at anonhq.com. I'm a former police officer, and I will be your host for The Anoncast. On this week's episode, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with the CEO and founder of the Cannabis Consumer Coalition, Larissa Bolivar. I would like to take a moment, however, to thank everybody who sent in an email. We received hundreds and hundreds of emails of support. We received hundreds of questions, comments, and we asked for you to send us information on anyone in your community making a difference, anyone that you think that we need to be aware of, anybody that you think that promotion through this podcast can help their cause. And you responded. I'd also like to thank everyone who sent in a design for our t-shirt design contest. We did pick 3 winners. If we didn't pick yours, I apologize. We had just way too many quality entries, and we couldn't pick all of them. But we do have 3 designs picked. If you head over to theanoncast.com, click on Support the Anoncast, those 3 shirts are now available. The 3 t-shirt contest design winners were Lori McEwen, Websa, and Andrea Floresta. And a very special thanks to Websa, who helped design our Anoncast website. One last thing before we get started. Today's episode is sponsored by SeditionShirts.com. Sedition Shirts is currently looking for new artists and new designs. If you head over to SeditionShirts.com, read a little bit about the company, and if you feel like submitting a design, they'll pay you on every shirt sold, not just a one-time fee. They'll pay you forever on every shirt design that they sell. Are you angry at the state of the world and want everyone to know? SeditionShirts.com. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, head over to theanoncast.com, click on sponsors, and if you like what you read, contact us. One thing about sponsorship and about our t-shirt sales is that 20% of all the proceeds that come in from sponsorship and t-shirt sales will go into the Anonymous Headquarters Community Fund, which will be used to donate to people, organizations, communities in their times of need. On this week's show, I had the opportunity to speak with Larissa Bolivar, the founder and CEO of the Cannabis Consumer Coalition. Over the past 14 years, Larissa has been a key figure in shaping the cannabis industry into what it has become in Colorado. She's worked on industry issues such as taxation, compliance, marketing, and was the CEO and founder of Denver's first dispensary, the Colorado Compassion Club. The mission of the Cannabis Consumer Coalition is to provide cannabis consumers with a voice in the growing cannabis industry and to ensure consumer rights and ethical behavior on behalf of cannabis-related businesses. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Larissa Bolivar. Larissa, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the cannabis industry? I know you've been involved here in Colorado since the beginning, pretty much.
Yeah, I moved to Colorado in 2001 as a medical marijuana refugee. And
what exactly is a medical marijuana refugee?
I was living in Virginia at the time, and they don't have, in fact, marijuana is not legal at all. There's a zero tolerance law in Virginia. So at the time I was married, and my husband had spinal stenosis, which is a spinal condition that's degenerative, and there's not much you can do outside of surgery and pharmaceutical pills. So we wanted to live here where he could access marijuana legally. And when we got here, there was no safe access to cannabis. Everybody had to go to their local drug dealer to get cannabis. There was no program, nothing really for medical marijuana at all. So we joined forces with Ken Gorman, who was the founder of the Denver 420 rally, and started educating people along the Front Range in Colorado on how, particularly in Denver and up north, there was Dr. Melanie down in Colorado Springs that was helping patients. So in the Denver and northern regions of the Front Range, we were hosting meetings and teaching people how they could become registered. And then I found one of the first doctors. Ken and I each found one doctor who would come out publicly and sign medical marijuana recommendations. At the time, the DEA had sent letters to doctors threatening their licenses if they recommended medical marijuana because it was a Schedule I. However, it was determined that doctors have a free speech right, a Second Amendment or First Amendment right to recommend cannabis because you're making a verbal recommendation. You're not writing the prescription. And so I have PTSD, and I asked my doctor to sign recommendations, which he started because PTSD is not part of the registry here in Colorado, but since he was a psychiatrist, he had, he's a doctor, so he was able to sign recommendations by looking at people's medical records and reviewing their medical history. And then Ken Gorman found a doctor by the name of Dr. Elke Glaser, and she was in retirement with Parkinson's, and came out of retirement to help with our endeavors because she herself was a medical marijuana patient. So with that, we were able to get hundreds of patients legal. And there was another conundrum, though. There was no access. So I formed an organization called Caregivers for Safe Access as a AFA organizer. And we started having regular meetings at a place called the Full Moon Bookstore, which we would dispense from as well. And then we moved to a church called Grant Avenue Methodist Church, like around 2003. We grew out of our space at the Full Moon Bookstore.
Did you run into any legal problems in your initial distribution?
Well, eventually. So we started having meetings at every Wednesday at a church, which we then moved to Thursdays, and we would go over whatever issues were of any interest to cannabis consumers at that time, and then dispense at the end of the meeting. In 2004, I was raided, and my house was raided. And so and this is probably the first time where, the reality of how our system works in our country in terms of the criminal justice system, and the power that law enforcement and our government has to supersede civil liberties. And by saying that, I mean they invoked the Patriot Act when they raided me. And
what was the reason for the raid? Was there a statute violation, a federal or state?
No, in fact, as we were told, somebody told them we were growing illegally. And they didn't have a search warrant. They invoked the Patriot Act and said that they didn't need a search warrant. No, we were not breaking any. We had 80 plants and 30 patients. So not only were we within state jurisdiction, we were within our legal limits. We were way within our legal limits.
Was it a federal raid?
Patients that we were serving. Yeah, they had 2 DEA agents, and they invoked the Patriot Act.
Okay, because I was in law enforcement for a long time before getting involved with Anonymous, and the idea of conducting a raid without a search warrant is just unheard of. I mean, at the local level, something like that would never get approved. So it's surprising to hear that something like that would happen.
Oh yeah, and it happens all the time. And the thing is that they use civil asset forfeiture laws to do that. So they took all of my equipment, everything, all my plants, all my equipment, books, even. I mean, I think it was obvious that we were growing, but they took our grow books, and never charged us. And they didn't have to because of civil asset forfeiture laws. What Colorado does, and I actually testified on a bill this year in support, which would have restricted cops to only using federal or civil asset forfeiture if there was a charge. Right now, they can take anything they want based on an assumption that you are committing a crime.
Right.
And the reason they do that is so that, and as you probably know, is because of their argument that, if you're doing something illegal, then you can use all of your assets to either leave the state or, of course, fight your way out of it. But we were never even given the opportunity to fight because we were never charged.
Right. And when I did, I unfortunately did seize many a vehicle in my law enforcement career, and the only stipulation was that it was used in the commission of a felony, which is pretty broad.
It is very broad.
But
it is very broad.
So let me.
And we're not the only people that the Patriot Act was used. In fact, the Patriot Act has been used in thousands of drug cases and only a handful of terrorist cases. And the entire time So when the police came to my house, they weren't even in uniform. It was North Metro Task Force. And if you, and I can send you articles.
Okay.
My last name used to be Lawrence. And so all of these articles are under my past life, quote unquote, my married life. But they, of course, the spokesperson for the Justice Department, or the attorneys, who was it? Lieutenant Lori Moriarty, I think, was the officer in charge, and she denied that they invoked the Patriot Act. And our Attorney General's office, or not district attorney, I can't think right now. I had to take Benadryl just to let you know, because I have a really bad cold.
Okay.
And my allergies are really bad, and I didn't want to cancel.
Well, let me ask you, how did your initial activities in the cannabis industry or the cannabis movement at the time lead to the creation of the Colorado Compassion Club?
Well, actually, it was that raid. So when they raided us, shortly after, we built a greenhouse because they took all of our equipment. And we had several caregivers donate plants to us. So we quickly put them out in the ground because it was June 1st when they raided us. So we still had a little window of opportunity to get plants outside and harvested by November. And so we did, and we got the attention of some local gangs as a result of our activities, and ended up getting home invaded and shot at and all kinds of things. And so we were kind of at our wit's end because we're being basically attacked by cops and robbers. And so we decided to move to Berkeley, Colorado, which is about an hour north of Denver, and an hour and a half north of Denver where we were living. And so we were driving to see a lot of our patients, and we were frustrated because, there's a lot of gas involved. And so we toyed with the idea of having a storefront. And then I believe it was November 2005 was when we opened our storefront to better serve our customers. And our whole reasoning behind it was they already raided us and they didn't charge us. If they raid us again and they don't charge us, they're going to look bad. We'll have more leverage at this point. So we had nothing to lose. And that was really, it was just something to solve a logistical nightmare of driving all around Colorado, the front range, to help patients, versus having a place. At the time, we had secured the Rob Corey as our attorney. When we were raided, that's who we contacted, and he supported the idea. Also, he would defend us if we got in trouble for it. So we just went ahead and got the storefront.
Now, currently, you're the CEO of the Cannabis Consumer Coalition. You guys are...
Yeah, I'm the founder.
You're a cannabis consumer watchdog organization, pretty much. Let me ask you, what exactly do cannabis consumers need protection from?
Well, this, as we speak, we have the whole pesticide fiasco that's happening in Denver. So for consumers, whether they're...
For the listeners who are unaware, recently a handful of Colorado dispensaries, actually I have a list here, I'll go ahead and I'll name them: Mindful, The Green Solution, Altitude East, Evolutionary Holdings, Green Cross Colorado, MMJ America, Organic Greens, Rhino Supply Company, and Sweet Leaf were all caught using illegal pesticides.
Yes, and that list has grown. Now it's Live Well and River Rock. And a lot of these organizations, for example, Organic Greens, it's in their name, but and River Rock were advertising themselves as organic. And so they're actually lying to consumers. And so that is what consumers need protection from, is unethical business practices all across the board. And, we live in a society where the bottom line supersedes human rights. I mean, that's just what's so. And so, we got the prison industrial complex. We have, unethical banking practices, all kinds of things that are impacting consumers. We'd be naive to assume that these things wouldn't occur in the cannabis industry. And so I founded the Cannabis Consumers Coalition after realizing at the Capitol there was no consistent consumer voice, and that everything was heavily slanted to the industry. All of the lawmaking that's occurring, I found out from the governor's office that consumers weren't even involved in the initial stakeholder meetings for a pesticide application, approved pesticides, I should say, and which really upset me. I had a meeting with the governor's office over the pesticide issue, and I asked them if there were any consumers present, and the answer I got back was, well, the government did a great job in representing consumers. And I said, so no consumer representation, and then the rest were industry, and the governor's marijuana advisor, his name was Andrew Friedman, said yes, and I, was not happy to hear that, because, the government hasn't also been aligning itself with consumers either. We've got corporation, problems with, the Citizens United ruling is a great example in corporations overpowering our government. So, I see it happening even in a local level with lawmakers here. And so that's, I decided, because, well, obviously I couldn't foresee the pesticide thing, but I realized when I established the Consumer Coalition that in the future we would be crossing these bridges. And so I'm unhappy that the pesticide issue occurred, because that means that there are a lot of people out there who are vulnerable, who are potentially exposed to harmful chemicals. The problem with the pesticide issue is that getting marijuana, first of all, is federally legal, as we know. So there's no known pesticide approved for it because it's illegal to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying that, they're arguing that pesticides like Eagle 20 are safe for consumption because it's approved for use for stone fruits, which are like apricots and peaches. It's approved for like grapes, leafy green vegetables, and asparagus. So we don't smoke those things, and we certainly don't concentrate them. We don't take pounds and concentrate them into ounces and put into food for medicine.
Right.
And mycobutanol, which is the chemical in question, is not approved by the tobacco industry. So, these businesses would have continued using these unapproved pesticides had, this issue not come about. And they weren't being upfront, and they were actually being deceitful. And so, I'm just, I latch onto that issue because that just happened recently. But it just goes to show that there needs to be consumer advocacy, consumer protection.
Now, there is testing of cannabis, but if I'm not mistaken, only the recreational cannabis is actually required to be tested by the state. Is there any truth to that?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. They did just pass a bill to allow for medical marijuana to be tested, but that's not even going to begin until July 2016.
Now, do the current tests actually reveal the use of Eagle 20, Avid, or Mallet, any of these banned pesticides?
They're not required to test for pesticides. The only thing that they're testing for right now is potency. Now, there's some labs, there's no labs that are certified to test for pesticides. There's labs that are testing for potency and for contaminants. I believe Green Labs may be testing for pesticides. I think they're the Green Labs. I have to look that up. Or no, not Green, Can Labs.
Now,
Labs is the only business that's testing for pesticides that I'm aware of, but it is not a requirement right now. So,
sorry to cut you off. I had spoken to another source in the cannabis industry who basically stated that the MED, the Medical Enforcement Division, was aware that these companies were using these pesticides, but they were not taking any action, and they did not take any action until your organization stepped in. Is that correct?
Okay. Well, actually, no. So, it was the Department of Environmental Health, the Denver Department of Environmental Health, that was actually investigating these misuse of pesticides. So that is where I got the information from. Now, the governor's office and this is where I found out that consumers weren't a part of the stakeholder process. The governor's office is going to be working with MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, in a collaborative effort to keep people from using unapproved pesticides while also testing and getting an approved list. They have a partial list, and they're certainly going to be lobbying, I'm sure, based on recent actions on behalf of the industry, to get Eagle 20 onto the approved list. But what's going to happen now is if people are caught in violation, Med is going to be the enforcer. They're going to be the ones who determine what violation and what fines, if any, are going to be. So, we have a long way to go with this. But they're going to be using, the Department of Agriculture is going to be using EPA standards to test these chemicals to see if they are indeed safe. So what I think what my organization did was we alerted the public. I know for sure that Denver was already in the process of investigating these businesses, and I spoke with with city officials, and they were concerned about the pesticide use. So that was already occurring. What I did was expose the issue, especially before the medical marijuana testing bill, because what I found in my CORA investigations, I also cored the Department of Agriculture for past violations, any violation that ever occurred since HB 1284. And it was found that a business called the Kind Mine in Idaho Springs was using illegal pesticides, and that was 3 years ago when the investigation first started. The investigation took a year, and then their plants were quarantined, and then that was it. Nobody in the public was notified that there was a medical marijuana dispensary, so they're specifically catering to patients, was using unapproved pesticides, and nobody even knew about it. And so I testified at the medical marijuana testing bill hearing about that to show the vulnerabilities that already exist. And I honestly think that my testimony helped, because Senator Irene Aguilar even mentioned to me that she was worried that they would kill the bill. Why somebody would kill that, I don't know, but the industry was fighting really hard. I was also trying to push for earlier testing, at least January 2016, and not July. So why they're waiting for July is because July 2016 is because they also passed a bill that's going to require the implementation of a reference library to create standards for medical marijuana and marijuana testing.
Now,
as a whole.
These companies... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
These companies that were caught using these pesticides, are they still open? Are they able to sell their product? What happened to the plants that they determined the pesticides were used on?
So it's all a case-by-case basis, of course. And what they had to do was have their plants put under quarantine, and they are going to be tested. And if they're clear, then they'll be released for sale. But as we just saw, we've got like Organic Greens, for example. They sued the city for their hold, saying that it was costing them thousands of dollars, and they were trying to get an injunction so that they could release the hold on their plants.
Is that still ongoing?
And then they lost the injunction.
Okay.
That was last week and the week before. So, actually the week before now. Time flies in like a really warped sense in this industry because it's so super fast. It's like it took me a long time just to get the chronology of my life together.
The spread of cannabis across the country is happening very rapidly. Now, and when we communicated through email, you advised that you don't really agree with some of the strategies that certain organizations are using to get recreational marijuana passed.
No, now this is something, and I understand the psychology behind what they're doing, and I support marijuana legalization. Decriminalization really is what I would like to see. But the strategy for legalization is to introduce recreational marijuana into medical marijuana states. And with the assumption that it will be easier to get it legalized, because once you legalize for medical marijuana, which is an easier argument because you're arguing on the side of compassion, and nobody wants people to suffer. And so, and most people will agree with that and vote for medical marijuana. Well, now you have them primed. So you prime these individuals and you prime them by showing, which I agree, that, by legalizing medical marijuana, the sky doesn't fall. There's no marijuana zombie apocalypse occurring in the streets. There's crime gets reduced in areas surrounding dispensaries. There's a lot of positives. And so it's easy to argue for full legalization. All of that is fine and dandy, except now, and you're seeing this with Washington State, with Oregon, and Washington, D.C. had proposed this, but they're trying to do away with medical marijuana and make everything recreational. And that, I think, is very disingenuous, because as a caregiver, and having been caregiver for some of the first people who were on the registry in Colorado, a lot of my patients have passed away by now. And
do you think this this strategy they're using kind of discredits the medical end of the marijuana industry?
Sure. Well, it does, but there's fortunately a group of people working to maintain the credibility of medical marijuana to balance that. But yeah, I think so, because the thing is most lawmakers, and especially law enforcement, were scoffing at marijuana being medicinal. And, our government, through scheduling, says that there's no medicinal value. And so, I do think that it kind of undermines medical marijuana in that regard. And, it's very frustrating because, back to my point about being a caregiver, a lot of these people are very ill, obviously. They're not faking it. But and I've heard lawmakers say that patients are faking their illness to avoid taxes or to avoid this and blah, blah, blah. No, a lot of these people are genuinely ill. And in our country, when you get sick for a long term, you lose a lot. I've had patients who lost their homes, obviously their jobs. They lost their support because, family and friends started abandoning them because it's really rough on an individual to be helping somebody who's, chronically ill. So, we're taking away valuable resources for medical marijuana patients, and we're taking away their, what I call their continuity of quality, affordable care. You see, there's a mantra that's going on that all use is medical, or excuse me, all use is recreational, or no, all use is medical. I was right. And that argument undermines, even though it's saying all use is medical, it undermines medical marijuana in that it makes it seem recreational. You see, because you're saying that the person that goes to the store to get an eighth to go to a concert to party that night is the same type of consumer that's going to get cannabis to treat their cancer. And that's apples and oranges. So even though that person buying that blunt might be more socially interactive, let's say because they have anxiety and that helps them, with their anxiety, they're not treating a disease that could potentially kill them. Whereas a person with cancer, who's probably on a very limited income, is using cannabis to save their lives. And instead of an eighth, they may need more of like a gram of oil a day.
Right.
Well, that gets really costly. And even if prices get down to $500 a pound, which is what they're predicting by like end of summer, you're still talking about people that need this as medicine in a large quantity, where even if they're paying $10 a day, that's still $300 a month that's not approved by insurance.
Right.
That's out of pocket. So, we have to consider these vulnerable members of the population. And they're saying that like what's happening in Washington is the stores that are catering to medical marijuana get like a special exemption, and then the people who are purchasing marijuana will still have to pay taxes, but not all of the taxes imposed by Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So what that shows, and what happened here in Colorado, because we had a caregiver bill that was also restricting caregiver and patient rights, and it was all under the premise for more revenue. So it has nothing to do with public safety and public health, and everything to do with money. So I think that, just all of it is for me very disheartening. This is not what I risked my life for. The reason I came out of the closet and helped people was because I saw that people were sick. Before I got into the cannabis movement, I was a technical recruiter. And, from like 95 to 2001. And that's a very lucrative job. That can be a six-figure easy. But then, when I moved to Colorado, 9/11 happened at the same time as the dot-com bubble burst, and I was staffing commercial and government contracts. And I didn't have the same network that I had in the DC area to get a job easily like I did here. However, it was, I would not have left my career completely had I not seen that there are people who are legitimately sick and dying. Because I have been using marijuana since I was 14, daily, and it was always easy for me to get. So for me to risk my life for a party just didn't make sense.
Right.
This was me risking my life for people who needed safe access, who were either dying or dealing with chronic conditions. So, I feel like activists such as myself, our compassion has been taken for granted because I'm not the only one. I speak on behalf of, I have, hundreds of activists across the country that I'm sure would share the same sentiments. And so where it's awesome, I don't believe in the drug war. I think it's one of our country's biggest failed policies ever.
Absolutely.
And, but so I'm happy that we're making headway with changing that policy. And I will always support ending the drug war. However, we need to protect patients. And so there are measures that are happening to do that. There's the CARES Act that's in a federal law that will schedule marijuana Schedule 2. Now, and while respecting state rights, what I read when I read that is we're gonna give marijuana to the pharmaceutical industry, and there are businesses that are positioning themselves to take advantage of that, like GW Pharmaceuticals and United Cannabis. And my concern is that if it goes to Schedule 2, it would have to go through just like we do now. We would have to get prescriptions, and it would be in the hands of doctors, not caregivers, not dispensaries, which is going to do nothing to solve the problem of illegal drug trafficking and all of the social ills that prohibition bring about. So it's counterproductive to the whole movement for legalization or decriminalization.
Do you think that marijuana should be removed from the schedule list entirely?
Absolutely. I think it should be just like alcohol and tobacco.
That brings me to another question, because I know in Colorado, if you want to purchase medical marijuana, you have to get a red card, and then when you make your purchase, everything is logged in the company's computer system, which I assume the Med has full access to, and that opens the question: aren't there major privacy concerns in the way that the MED does allow marijuana to be distributed?
Sure. That's always been an argument that people have used. You've got organizations out here in Colorado that were trying to sue the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and I don't know if they went after Med, but they certainly have in testimony. They're absolutely they're absolutely concerned about privacy. I myself, I don't think that. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think that law enforcement is going to comb through lists of sick people and go raid them. You know what I mean? I think that, especially when we made medical marijuana a lower priority, I think they're going to be more concerned with licensed businesses and they are concerned with caregivers.
Right.
Unbalanced concern, because they're saying that the caregivers are the almost exclusive source of diversion. Yet when people are getting arrested for diverting product across state lines, the majority of it has been branded material, and if it's flour, it's been found with branded material. But anyhow, you know what I mean? I think that the Med's going to be more focused on those issues and not individual users. The whole seed to sale tracking system, or having patients register, all of this stuff is being done because this is an industry that's emerging from the black market. And a lot of these policies are, based in fear and overprotection. And, I would hope that as we move forward, what my ideal would be that, marijuana would be more like a nutraceutical. And I could go, get it either from a dispensary or even from like Whole Foods, where I get my kava tea, but for now, I think that they have all this record keeping, patients having to register on a registry, caregivers having to register. That's all that's all safety controls that, I don't really think are going to last once marijuana becomes legal, but it's definitely has been a concern for a lot of organizations and individual activists that I know.
Now, when we initially contacted you, it was in reference to some information I received a couple months ago, more rumor and speculation than anything else. But we had heard that Monsanto was dipping their toe in the cannabis industry and distributing products through a dispensary called River Rock. Now, I did a little bit of investigation, and what I found appeared to be a tangled web of big money players who were involved in not only cannabis, but the corn industry, Monsanto, and a lot of other big money companies. What have you found about Monsanto connection to cannabis?
Well, I've heard that they are in Uruguay. Um, but what people were concerned about on my end was the United Cannabis, which is owned by Tony Verzura, or founded by Tony Verzura, who was one of the founders of River Rock, and I believe he's no longer associated with River Rock as of the last few months. But he appointed somebody as an advisor to United Cannabis board, whose name is John C. Hunter III.
Right. John Hunter is also the CEO of River Rock, isn't he?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
No.
Norton Alvarez is one of the other CEOs. It was Norton Alvarez and Tony Verzura who founded River Rock. Unless something's changed, because, to be quite honest with you, I kind of had my events, but, how do you question the integrity of a multi-million-dollar business that has all this marketing revenue? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a buzz. And so for me, my concern was when I looked up John C. Hunter III, and I had some folks send me anonymously connections that he had that were very shady. So, I wrote about I wrote about it, and I'm certainly concerned. But what it looks like to me is that United Cannabis, and this is what Tony Verzura said in multiple posts, is that they're trying to beat out Monsanto. Well, all I hear is you're trying to be the same then. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's if I meet somebody and they say that they're trying to beat Walmart, then obviously they're going to emulate that type of business model and make it bigger or more successful or the same in a different type of industry setting. So that's how he defended his appointment of John C. Hunter III as an advisor, was because he used to work for a Monsanto company. He was CEO of Solutia, and Solutia is Monsanto's chemical company. So this, for me, it was an ethical issue, and that's ultimately how I framed it. Like, of all the CEOs, of all the successful businessmen and women in this country, why would you appoint somebody like John C. Hunter III? Because he just looks nefarious So Solutia is, we know Monsanto created Agent Orange.
Right.
Well, John C. Hunter III was a lieutenant in the Army Chemical Corps when they were using Agent Orange in Vietnam. So, then while he was the head of Solutia, there was a town called Anniston, Alabama, and to this day, it is still known as the most contaminated or most poisonous town in the United States because Monsanto was using the chemical, I think was using PBA or PPC. This has been over a year now. PBC, hang on, let me just look it up real quick. Because I should send you PCB.
PCB.
And I'll send you the article. But he was CEO when it was discovered that they were poisoning people, and he initially tried covering it up. And then he was arrested for, but not found guilty for market manipulation. So there's financial fraud in there as well. And I had somebody call me anonymously, and they were concerned about United Cannabis and how they were getting funding, and this John C. Hunter III guy with this nefarious past, and what's he doing to help them? If he's bad, are they bad? It was like this thing, but there's there's only so much that I can do as an organization to call attention to this concern. And, again, like I mentioned, I framed it based on an ethical question of why should we have this type of person in our community?
Right.
And, Tony Vizura was defending him, saying, oh, people change their ways. Everybody deserves a second chance, playing on the heartstrings. But for me, I have a degree in psychology with a minor in communications. So, all I hear is spin. And that's what I called them out on. Like I, viciously attacked Tony on Facebook, to the point to where he brought up, suing for slander, saying I could sue you for slander. So obviously I struck a nerve. But all of this is public record. Like you can just Google John C. And I have an email from an anonymous source that I can forward you that shows, all of John C. Hunter's, just all of his nefarious deeds through the years and all these questionable connections and things that happen and, even connections to law enforcement. So you're right. What's happening is you have a lot of large players coming together and, I feel powerless, to be honest with you, in trying to, it's not up to me, to stop this type of stuff. And that's why you have power in numbers. And so having a consumer coalition is certainly helpful. But, we're talking about people who are representing billion-dollar interests. And so...
Now, why do you think that these companies, these big money companies, haven't opened up shop already here, or have they?
Well, if they have, they're probably doing it really clandestine. I think it has to do with the federal law. I think that, once marijuana is legalized, that's why I question the CARES Act. And Tony had mentioned that on a Facebook post. And I question the intent of it. And, because some of these cannabis, especially companies like GW Pharmaceuticals, could stand to use, make a lot of money, especially if they're marketing, certain blends of cannabis that are, going to cancer, which, they're trying to do at these GW Pharmaceuticals. Now, I know United Cannabis and Tony Vizura, they've given out, that, they have a line that's similar to nutraceutical. That's how I mentioned before, that's how I would like to see cannabis go, is in that realm. But, the Schedule 2 has me question the intentions of and the integrity of what he said. And I guess we have to wait and see. But, it's something that, for me, I blogged about and alerted consumers about. But, the other side of this is that we live in a very apathetic society.
Yes, we do.
And people may hear this thing. They may hear that, oh, this company is really bad. But, they're not going to mobilize a lot to do anything about it, And, unless there's an actual harm being shown, where somebody dies or gets hurt or gets sick, most people are going to be like, well, whatever. And, it's not necessarily by their own fault. We live in a society where life is really demanding from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. It's hard to pay attention to our own lives, let alone others and other issues. And, as an activist for 14 years now, the biggest hurdle that I've had to run into is apathy and getting people up and out of their homes and, whether it's picketing or, going to testimony, it's not an easy task. People need to know what's in it for them. And so, where for me, what's in it for me is I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism, but I support the notion of conscious capitalism where we empower communities and empower other people and not tear each other down and try to control the world type of capitalism. And so I always had a very idealistic view that the cannabis industry could be different, especially because a lot of my peers had the same notions of, a government that's, not under the control of corporates and that's more fair for individual voters, and an industry, even if it's outside of cannabis, that respects consumers and as opposed to takes advantage of them. And unfortunately, we have a society where people get taken advantage of a lot. And so my concern with the cannabis industry is that these big players are coming in to rig the system. I've seen it on a local level. We have industry groups like the Marijuana Industry Group C4, which is the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, and the Cannabis Business Alliance, who have been steadily lobbying for protectionist regulations, whether it's against caregivers, patients, testing, and they get a lot of recognition. They have hundreds of thousands of dollars in lobbyists at the Capitol a day.
How impactful do you think the cannabis lobbyists are?
Very impactful, especially when I find out from the governor's office that they haven't even reached out to consumers and that they're only working with industry. Why would you only work with industry on a pesticide issue when you're working with people who only care about bottom line? Boggles my mind, especially in an administration that's supposed to be they're supposed to be Democrats. I mean, I'm unaffiliated. I refuse to be a part of any of the two-party system because of this very reason.
Now, what is currently on the agenda for the Cannabis Consumer Coalition? What are you guys working on right now?
Well, the pesticide issue has taken up a lot of time, and it still is. So I have reached out to the Department of Ag now. I have been working with the city of Denver. So, our goal is to, moving forward, be a part of setting standards on pesticide issues, but then also setting standards for consumers.
Now, where do you see the industry in the next decade? Do you see legalization in all 50 states? What hurdles do you see in front of you?
I do, actually. I think that we have a lot of momentum going. And I think that I think it's a perfect storm situation in our country because a lot of our states are suffering for revenue. And, you can see it with the crumbling of our infrastructures.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I think that, so the legalization argument, outside of going into states that allow for medical marijuana, the other argument is revenue generation for the state. And I think that that's a winning argument. And I think there's enough momentum, even at the Capitol and the federal level, to start changing drug policies. At least marijuana. I don't see that for heroin or cocaine for anytime soon. But for marijuana, I think the money potential and the fact that you already have Wall Street involved speaks a lot for what could possibly happen in the next 10 years. So I do think that we will have, at minimum, medical marijuana fully legalized. We already have 23 states. All we need is 3 more to have the majority. And I've always thought that would be the watershed moment and facilitate change quicker. I think that Amendment 64 caught a lot of people by surprise. I don't think, and based off of my experience with lawmakers, I don't think that they thought that we would pass the full legalization of marijuana. And so now they're working to create all these regulations around it in this, in a haphazard sometimes way. But, I think that overall our quote unquote experiment is going really well. And, if we can address certain concerns like edibles, for example, we've had some suicides and murders, which, for me, opens up a lot of other questions, not whether marijuana is safe or not, but, the fact that some people just shouldn't be using it.
I wasn't sure if I was going to bring it up or not, but now that you've mentioned it, you mentioned Ken Gorman earlier. He was murdered in his home, and if I'm not mistaken, that's still unsolved to this day. It seems as though there have been a lot of homicides surrounding medical marijuana. What's your opinion on that?
Well, when Ken was murdered, that was an obvious hit because that was not. He wasn't robbed. Like when whoever went into his house and killed him, their motive was political.
Well, there are a lot of implications to that statement. I mean, does that mean it was big business? Was it the government? This is the kind of thing that drives conspiracy nuts crazy.
We don't know. They even interviewed my ex-husband as a suspect, but they also interviewed a lot of other of his colleagues because, we all have worked together on and off through the years. My ex-husband, I don't think he had no motive. He had nothing to gain, and neither did a lot of the people that I worked with, other activists. Now, he was in contact with some bad street gangs. He had been interacting with a lot of Vietnamese people, so there's a rumor that it was them that murdered him. So it's really hard to say because during those days it was real Wild West, and even when his murder occurred, which was 2007, was still 3 years before any regulations hit the industry, the medical marijuana industry. So you had a lot of people who had significant stakes in the black market who were emerging into the light of day, right? So, I mean, I had this experience myself where I had gangs were either shooting at me or knocking on my door asking me how they could become legal. And so it put all of us in harm's way. I myself was held hostage for 9 months by a crazy grower, and escaped barefoot and ran to the fire department bleeding and bruised. I think that there was a sentiment out there that people didn't want marijuana or medical marijuana legal, and we were all high-profile figures. So I don't know. I don't think it was the same person. I don't even know if it was the same group, but there were definitely people that were out to harm us. And there is a rumor that it was, and I say us because other people have been murdered, other people have been attacked, and the cops did nothing about it. And so, like when I was home invaded and I called the police, they told me I had Second Amendment rights. That was the extent of their help. And so, and these people had tried to kill me. My uncle, who at the time I had a garden in his house. There's really dangerous times. And so, they're claiming that they have Ken's murder in jail and that he's in jail for something else. And I heard rumors, that it could be, other, like white supremacists. And I'm like, why would they be involved? So it's all rumors, Alec. It's really frustrating. And, but what they told Ken's daughter, who I'm still friends with, and she's not part of the marijuana scene. She's always stayed out of it. But, that they do have the suspect in prison. But that doesn't there's no closure. Like, we don't know. There's no trial that I'm aware of. There was no charges that I'm aware of. Like, and, to be honest with you, it's still a big question mark. Like, all I know is that it was a hit. And, but who, who knows? And, there's a lot of rumors that it was law enforcement because Ken was very instrumental in getting a lot of caregivers legal. And, they went from being illegal underground drug dealers to legal caregivers helping multiple patients. And he was actively doing this. And so, some of us thought that possibly he incurred the ire of the police for that. But, obviously his murder didn't stop anything happening. I mean, the 420 rally still went on. Everything continued on. So, it is a big question mark. I wonder, what the motive was and what they stood to gain would be, for me, the answer to that would be what would solve who murdered him. Because if it were not a hit, they would have taken his plants and money. They left everything in his house. So it was an obvious hit.
Well, that is something that I'm definitely going to continue to look into. And hopefully we can use the power of Anonymous to bring some light to it. Yes.
And I have to say, I was like really shocked when I saw that you guys reached out to me. I have a lot of concern about what's happening in our world and in our country, and I'm happy that there are organizations out there that are strong and force that are able to create enough disruption to force people to answer questions.
Well, the Anonymous movement has as much momentum now as the cannabis industry does. It's growing at a rapid pace, and all we hope to do is bring awareness to people who otherwise wouldn't get the information we're trying to get across to them.
Yeah.
Larissa, I appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the Anonymous community?
Not anything that I can think of. My biggest concern that I shared was this push to make everything recreational. I think, we need to keep integrity with what our intentions were and continue to help people who are sick and serve them the best way we can and not commodify them and treat them, as a revenue potential. I think that that's disgraceful. And then I think that we need to just keep an eye out on these big organizations and the moves that they make, and that people really need to be less apathetic in whatever area that's of concern, but, especially in paying attention to how the industry is evolving. Oh, yeah, actually, there is something else I want to mention. The one thing that really is chafing me are, I'm writing my master's thesis right now, and I'll be done in August, but the working title is Enduring Racial Disparity After Cannabis Legalization. And so, but it's also an economic disparity. And again, we have policies that are probably being created out of fear, but also the industry is certainly leveraging the fear of lawmakers to create policies that are to their benefit. But my concern is all these high licensing and application fees to have a marijuana business where you're directly dealing with the product. You can open an ancillary business, fine. But, if I want to open a marijuana business, I need at least $1 million to afford the capital investments. Part of that is the application process. In Colorado, that can run well over $20,000 that you don't get back.
Just for applications.
And then, just for applications. And then Hawaii, I believe it's like you have to have assets in $2 million. Florida, I think also, where they're pushing for that with their CBD laws. Nevada, you have to have $250,000 in liquid assets. And then, these application fees, are running into, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And that's creating winners and losers out of the industry. And we have people in our own industry and in our own community that are defending this, saying, well, it's expensive to open businesses. I don't know any other business out there unless I'm trying to go into like arms or, a pharmaceutical business or, again, maybe this is part of the push to make marijuana, pharmaceutical, but I don't know any other business where I need millions of dollars to get into. I can, let's say I were a software engineer, I could write code and market that and get investors. If I wanted to open myself, I'm not a software, but I'm just using that as as an example. Me personally, I can go tomorrow and open up a liquor store with what I have in savings, and get a loan to get my my product and call it a day. However, if I wanted to get into the marijuana business, I can't even get into the industry that I help fight for. And, I when I was complaining about application fees, I actually had a prominent member of the community call me entitled. And, not just me, but, she said me directly, but also referring to other community members sounding entitled as well. And, no, it's not entitlement. It's the fact that they're pricing it out of reach for a lot of people, and it's creating a class. There's already a class division that you can see. And I was actually going to write my paper on racial and economic disparity, but I needed to narrow my focus, and I really wanted to have something in academia that addressed the racial disparity because of the fact that the majority of people in prison for nonviolent drug offenses are minorities. Mm-hmm. And so they can't even get a job in the industry that they're in jail for if they get out. Like if you have a nonviolent drug crime, a felon or a criminal record, you can't get a badge to work in the marijuana industry, let alone get a license to own one. So that's why, I'm focusing on that. But I think that we need to bring more attention to these astronomical fees that are shutting out other players, and really creating an unfair disadvantage. I don't think that, it should be regulated like napalm or, plutonium.
So basically you're saying it's just not a level playing field and only big money can get into the industry.
Absolutely. It's not, even if a small business tries, the regulations are so imposing. Like
regulations like this seem to create a black market.
Oh, God, yeah. And then the high taxation, Washington State's trying to figure out why their black market is so big. Well, duh. They have a 75% combined tax rate. It's taxed at 3 different distribution points. Well, of course you're gonna, especially in and they have extra marijuana because I think their last year's growing season was longer than normal. So many marijuana farmers were able to get another harvest out of last year's season. So their market is flooded. So who's going to go to the store and pay 75% in taxes when they can just go to somebody they already know that's already selling it illegally? Oh my God! And then there's, maybe we should talk again because there's all kinds of issues. The other issue is blaming caregivers exclusively for diversion. That is really frustrating because all of it, like I mentioned before, a lot of the material that they're capturing outside of state lines is branded material. And so to say it's exclusively caregivers, that's the industry leveraging that argument because they want those customers. And they're working with lawmakers to try to do away with the whole caregiving model and, scapegoating the caregivers for, the black market. But it's just not so. I did an interview with Channel 7 here locally 2 weeks ago on a business called Buddy Boy Brands where one of their employees was selling pounds of marijuana out the back door. So, I think that we have a lot of just greed at play that people should be aware of. There's a lot of greed. It's kind of disgusting. I had a board meeting today, in fact, and that was the first thing we started talking about was the greed in the industry and how it's, making people just not want to be part of it anymore. And that's what they want. That's what they want. And, it's happening. So now marijuana is going to be, slowly becoming no different than any other industry, which I guess, is predictable, but it's sad. I was hoping that we could be better than this.
Well, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, and maybe these things will change in the future. You can always hope.
We can always hope.
Well, Larissa, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you joining us on the show today, and we'll definitely stay in contact with you in the future.
Okay, and I'll send you the information that I talked about, the articles.
Excellent.
And the email that was sent to me. So, because it is interesting.
So there's probably a lot more going on in the cannabis industry than you ever imagined. At this time, Anonymous, along with the Cannabis Consumer Coalition, is calling for a boycott of the following dispensaries for their use of illegal pesticides: Altitude East Treatments, Evolutionary Holdings, Green Cross Colorado, Green Solutions, Mindful, Organic Greens, Rhino, and Sweetleaf. For more information on Larissa Bolivar and the Cannabis Consumer Coalition, go to cannabisconsumer.org. Another thing we asked you to do was to send us your anonymous-related art, music, fiction, or poetry. And this week, we have a song from Blendrix remixed by GDLK called Yes, We Scan. If you want to send us your art, fiction, music, or poetry, go ahead and send us an email at podcast@anonhq.com.
Nobody is listening to your telephone calls. That's not what this program's about. They are not looking at people's names, and they're not looking at content.
Terrorists will come after us if they can. us which they can.
That about does it for this week's show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Next week, I will be speaking with Alex Londos of Advanced Disaster Relief. Alex is an amazing guy. Just got back from Nepal to do earthquake relief. Definitely check in next week. Now, for those of you who are tuning in because you're curious, because you want to find out more about Anonymous, to see what this show is really all about. About a year ago, I discovered probably the single best Anonymous video ever made, The Final Resistance. And so for those of you who are here just to check us out and see what Anonymous is all about, I leave you with this. Till next week.
Citizens of nations around the world, we are Anonymous. This is a message from us. From the resistance. From the last line of defense. We have been watching the world's events unfold around you. And truth be told, we are highly displeased. The monstrosities carried out by governments all over the world on a daily basis has grown far too old. And we are here to bring these corrupted acts to justice. If you are tired of watching the world, our only home, be ripped to shreds for an illusion of riches, based on paper, with false value placed upon it. If you are afraid of your government, or afraid to wake up in the morning, to a war-torn city, whether you're afraid of your life being lost, because you've been tossed into pointless wars, fighting for someone you'll never meet, or who will never care about you, but the money he takes because of you, then you, my friend, are part of the resistance. We are here to ask the public to join our crusade. Inform. If you are hearing this broadcast, if you are watching this transmission, if you are reading our words and letters, then you, my friend, are Anonymous. Part of an ever-growing legion that will never perish. Part of a collective that relies in unison. This message goes directly to the people that are aware of our corrupted and unwillingly society, as well as to the people that are not aware, but wishing to be, wishing for something more in life besides money and a job. Furthermore, we will never be destroyed. We, as in you, and us. We, as in everything, and everyone. We, as an idea. Ideas cannot be arrested, killed, or broken. It cannot be interfered, nor can it be stopped. Ideas, like courage, is contagious. Ideas cannot be divided. The idea is in the mind. You cannot throw it away in the trash. You cannot erase it, nor can you forget that. We are Anonymous. And we are an idea to be reckoned with. We are an idea that will never halt, or stand idly by, while our governments commit vile acts against the people they claim to serve and protect so very highly. If you are tired of your government and its broken system, if you are tired of people not willing to care for our world, our rights, our society and its future generations, then join us. Join the resistance. What have you done so far in life except become like the other 7 billion people who are going through the same process? We know this is why you seek us. Both us and yourself knew the moment you clicked this video, or heard about it, that your time and moment has came. Because you, like most of the people around you, want change for the better. You want compassion. You want care. You want rights. And an open society that makes positive impact without government interruption. You want less value on human possession, and more value on human life. We know this is why you seek to become Anonymous. Yet most people are worried worried that they won't succeed in life, worried that they won't have enough money to feed their families, worried about their future, worried that they won't have enough money to pay the rent, worried that someday they will become something low, while others expected something high from them, worried about their job and their appearance, worried about death. You want something more to life than to be born, grown up, make money, retire, and die, like the millions of people inhabiting this globe, and all of it, for nothing. That is why we are here. That is why the resistance has came. We are not saviors. We are concerned citizens, formed, built and molded upon from an idea that purifies itself with freedom and justice. We were here since the start, since the beginning of you, since the birth of everyone, and everything. We are fighting for your rights. We are fighting for you, and you only. We speak as one, for we wish for no fame or profit, but sincerity and equality. Yet we are not just one single person, group, or community who call ourselves anonymous. We are not just hackers like the media says, and has corrupted you with. We are you. We are your neighbors. We are your fathers, and your mothers. We are your sons, and your daughters. We are your aunts, and we are your uncles, your sisters, and your brothers. We are the poor unemployed man, who is looking for his purpose in life, and the food to place on his family's table, as well as the lawyer, who fights for the accused under the court of law, and the teacher that teaches the children, and the man that delivers your mail, the students in your school, the workers in your company. We are the person near you, the person walking with you, the person in the car you are seeing right now. We are your lover and enemy. We are them, and they are us. This was a message from Anonymous, the final resistance. This was a call of justice. We are Anonymous. We are the resistance. We are Legion. We are an idea. We do not forgive. We do not forget. United as one. Divided by zero. Expect us.